Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional League, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
And welcome to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kenneth Gruenfelder, and once again, we got another jam-packed show for you guys today. We're going to go through 4 different segments. The first segment we're going to talk about is the top 10 fantasy duo combos, and this is QB receiver combos that I think are the best when it comes to fantasy. Then the second list we're going to do is talk about teams that you want to key in on and get players from. These are like the top 10 teams, the top 10 offenses, I believe. And these are guys that you really want to get on your fantasy teams and try to key in on some of the star players that some of these teams have. And then the next list will be teams that you want to avoid drafting players from. These are teams that have offenses that are questionable. It's questionable when it comes to the quarterback position especially, and they just don't have enough playmakers to make themselves a good offense, and they don't have enough players that are going to give you good fantasy players. And then for the last list we're going to do is, it's going to be something new that I'm going to do for the next couple of shows. It's going to be called the segment Draft or Pass. So this week we're going to do QB, so I picked 10 QBs, and I'm going to decide whether or not to draft them or pass them, and I'll give my reason as to why I will either draft them or pass them when it comes to fantasy drafts. So let's get right into the first segment. So we're going to start off with the first segment, and that's going to be the fantasy duo combos, quarterback and wide receiver combos. Now, there might be a tight end on this list because it's just too hard to pass up on this particular player with their QB. So we'll get into that a little bit later in the segment. So let's start off this list. So I got Tom Brady and Mike Evans as one of the best duos in fantasy. Now, Mike Evans in the beginning of the season wasn't really particularly putting up, great games, except Tom Brady was throwing it to him in the red zone a lot. And, Mike Evans really benefits from that. Mike Evans is a tall guy. And, he's going to go up and get those 50-50 balls. And he's definitely one of the best red zone targets in the NFL. And Tom Brady always looked for him in the red zone. And especially when you look at, I think it was the Broncos game early on in the year. Mike Evans had 2 receptions for 2 yards, but they were both 2 touchdowns. So Mike Evans is going to put up points, especially in the red zone. So listen, you can get Mike Evans before Tom Brady, because Tom Brady is not going to be somebody you're going to take in the your first 7 rounds. He's a guy that you could definitely get later on in the draft. Mike Evans is somebody you might want to get a little bit earlier. So yeah, that's one of the best combos to start off this list. The next pair of QB and receiver combo that I have here is Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. Now, Keenan Allen, I think, kind of reemerged as a great receiver again. I mean, he's been a very good receiver his whole career. But now with Justin Herbert, he turned back into the old Keenan Allen. And he was able to get consistent quarterback play for the majority of the season. And his numbers benefited from that. And Justin Herbert is one of those guys that's going to be a rising star. And listen, Keenan Allen is probably going to be somebody that's going to get taken in the mid-rounds when it comes to fantasy. Justin Herbert, I think you're going to want to get a little bit earlier because I think he's going to be somebody that is going to get drafted a lot earlier, considering the kind of year that he had last season, his rookie season. I mean, the one game that was terrible was the game against the Patriots where they lost 45-0. But that's not going to happen that often. The Chargers offense is really good. And, yeah, I mean, I expect a lot of touchdowns this season with Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert. So another duo that I have on this list is Matthew Stafford and Robert Woods. Matthew Stafford is an upgrade from Jared Goff. And I think that Robert Woods is one of the more consistent wide receivers in the league. And especially when it comes to fantasy, I mean, he does put up, 10 to 15 points pretty much every game. And I think that now with the addition of Matthew Stafford, he's only going to get better. And I think Matthew Stafford is going to look to him as his top target. It was close between Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, but I think Robert Woods is more consistent. And Cooper Kupp has been banged up the past couple of seasons. So that's why I went with Robert Woods over Cooper Kupp on this QB receiver duo combo list. So I got Matthew Stafford and Robert Woods here. Then I got Ryan Tannehill and A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown had another great season, another 1,000-yard-plus season. And, I think he's now elevated to that number one wide receiver status. There's a couple times where he had a few duds, but, Tannehill now is the QB in Tennessee. He's putting up a lot better numbers. And, I think he's only going to get better, seriously. And he played last season with, an injury. So, now if he's going to be healthy, he's only going to get better. And A.J. Brown is definitely somebody you're going to want to get early on in the draft, early to mid-rounds. I mean, obviously there are better receivers out there, but he's somebody that you're going to want to get. And Ryan Tannehill is going to fall back in the draft. But I think that he's somebody that you can get him either on the waiver wire or, if you need a backup QB, I think he's definitely going to be there later in the draft. But, yeah, if you got these two guys on your team, another guy, A.J. Brown, that's going to get a lot of yards. So now we get into kind of top six, I guess you want to say. These are kind of the better combos. But, I said I wasn't going to go in any particular order, but, it kind of seems like I am. But the next combo on my list is Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. And listen, you could tell early on that Stephon Diggs being in this offense really changed the dynamics of how this Bills offense was. Josh Allen has improved every season statistically since he entered the league back in 2018. And him and Stephon Diggs were absolutely fantastic this past season. And that's really what the Bills needed, was that number one wide receiver. Now, I think Stephon Diggs kind of elevated himself to a number one wide receiver when it comes to fantasy, so he's somebody you're going to want to get early on. He's going to probably be a second, third round pick, I really do. And especially when it comes to PPR, because Stephon Diggs was one of the most targeted wide receivers this past season. And especially Josh Allen, the trust, the relationship that they've built, I think it's only going to get better. So, when you are drafting, and, let's say you draft the running back first, and you're looking for a wide receiver in the second round, I think Stephon Diggs should definitely be on your radar because, like I said, especially when it comes to PPR, you're definitely going to want to get somebody that gets a lot of targets and gets a lot of receptions. And Stephon Diggs is that. Now, Josh Allen, he's somebody that could be one of the first QBs taken off the board and could possibly be the first QB taken off the board in some leagues because of how he's elevated his game, compared to his sophomore season and his rookie season. I mean, he was amazing this year. He was an MVP candidate, and he's going to put up a lot of points. So, expect for him to go around, I guess I would want to say the fourth or fifth round. Because I know for me, when it comes to two QBs, playing in a 2 QB league, you're going to want to get one of your QBs early. And Josh Allen could be one of those guys that, by the third or fourth round, if I feel comfortable with my first couple picks and I don't feel like I need to build my team that much, other than focusing on QB, I mean, Josh Allen's definitely a guy that I would go after. So, if you have Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen, especially in a especially in a PPR league, that's going to be a deadly combination, because that's Josh Allen's top target, and he's supposed to put up a lot of numbers this season. And Stephon Diggs gets a lot of targets because of Josh Allen, and expect him to have another great season. So the next couple of guys that I have on here is I have Russell Wilson with DK Metcalf / Tyler Lockett. Now, the reason I did that was because, Tyler Lockett is a very strange fantasy player. He can have one game where he drops, 50 points, like I mentioned in the last show when I was doing the top 10 fantasy performances when he had over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then he could have a goose egg, a flat-out 0 in one game. But you know what? I think he has a lot of upside. When he's on, he's on. And he's one of those guys that, can blow right past you. And, if you have him and Russell Wilson as a combination, that's not a bad combination. But it could also be bad because Russell Wilson can have bad games. And if he has a bad game, Tyler Lockett is probably going to have a bad game too. And then you got nothing. But I also had DK Metcalf here as well. The reason why I had both of them is because they're both targeted so much by Russell Wilson. I mean, because they're his top 2 targets. And, one game, one of them can go off. The other game, another guy can go off. So it was kind of tough to decide. I mean, I think DK Metcalf is probably the slightly better option. And, he's going to be going into his 3rd season, I believe, in the NFL. Yeah, his 3rd season in the NFL. And I think that, if you have him and Russell Wilson as a combination, that's pretty good combination. That's another combination that, if you get those two, your fantasy team is probably going to be pretty good. I mean, it also depends on what else you do, but, it's not a bad start. Now, I think DK Metcalf's stock has kind of increased a little bit because I think now going into his 3rd season, people are going to be looking for him to take the next step. And I think he'll be able to do it. I really do. He's a big guy. He's a strong guy. He goes up for those 50-50 balls. He's a red zone target. He caught a couple of game winners, made some big plays in the playoffs for the Seahawks. I think he's, poised to have another good season. And you know what? Can he be a number 1 wide receiver in fantasy? I think so. I definitely do. With PPR, he's going to be targeted a lot. So, you're going to want to get a guy that gets targets. And he's one of those guys. Tyler Lockett, is he a number 1 wide receiver? No, he's not. He's definitely number 2 flex option. But, it all depends on who you get. I mean, DK Metcalf is probably going to be, out of these 3 guys, between Russ, Lockett, and DK, DK is going to be the first pick out of the 3. Then Russ, then Lockett. That's how I see these 3 players falling in fantasy drafts. So, if, like I said, depending on what you do in the first round, wherever you are, wherever you're sitting, if you're, in the top half, the top 5 of the draft, top 8, however many teams you're doing, because, I typically do 10 teams, if you're in the top 5, odds are you're probably going to take a running back. So if you're in that lower half, you're probably going to end up taking one of the receivers. But if you're in that top 5, you take a running back, then, hey, listen, if DK Metcalf is there, take him as your number 1 wide receiver. And then Russ, you could probably get, in the 6th or 7th round, depending on, what everybody else does in the draft. But listen, you got another combo that, DK Metcalf's a red zone weapon. Tyler Lockett has those boomer bust games, but he can have those games, like I said, when he drops 50 points. If you got them and you got Russ, they're going to put up points for you. But they're not the highest team on this list. So the next combo I have here is Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins. Now, I think this combo works well. I really do, because I mentioned that I think Kyler Murray is going to be one of the top fantasy QBs going into 2021. And, the second half of the season and towards the end, he was, dealing with the injury bug. And that kind of affected the offense a lot, especially late in the season when they lost to the 49ers, who were all banged up. But I think he's going to have another great season, and I think he's only going to improve. This past season, he had 26 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, I believe. And I think his rookie season he had 20 and 12. So he's only going to get better. And I think with DeAndre Hopkins, they're going to continue to develop a better rapport, and they're only going to have a better season because of it. Now, DeAndre Hopkins' touchdowns were down this past season. I believe he only had 6 touchdowns. So, not something you typically see out of DeAndre Hopkins, but, I think it's only going to get better. I really do. And I think also with the Cardinals adding A.J. Green, I think A.J. Green's going to be one of those under-the-radar signings. Not necessarily in fantasy, but just, to help in real life, basically. But, Kyler Murray, listen, he's mobile. He's going to get you some rushing yards, and that's going to help. And, DeAndre Hopkins is a guy that gets a lot of targets as well, and he's going to get a lot of attention too. So you got to worry about that too. Because some games maybe he might get shut down. I mean, it's hard to shut him down, but if both of these guys are healthy, the Cardinals are going to have a really good offense again. And I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to have more of a bounce-back season, a season that you're typically going to see. I mean, not to say that his season wasn't good this past season with the Cardinals. He had some great plays, the Hail Murray against the Buffalo Bills, but I think we're going to see double-digit touchdowns from DeAndre Hopkins, because like I said, like I've been saying a lot on the show, is that typically, when players are introduced to a new scheme, a new system, it kind of takes them a while to get used to it. And you know what? I think year 2 is usually the best for most of these teams, to succeed, except if you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So yeah, Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins, the next combo that I had on this list. Now, another combo that I have is a combo that, really didn't play that much this past season in 2020 due to injuries and inconsistency, and that was Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper. Now listen, I'm not a Cowboys supporter, don't really like the Cowboys, never really liked the Cowboys, but when it comes to fantasy, Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper can definitely put up monster numbers. And we saw that in some of the games that Dak Prescott played in 2020, before he suffered that horrific ankle injury against the Giants. But when it comes to Amari Cooper and Dak Prescott, ever since Amari Cooper made it to Dallas, got traded to Dallas in that trade from the Raiders, he's been Dak Prescott's top target when it comes to wide receivers. And, he's crazy. I mean, when he actually is playing well, he's arguably one of the best receivers in the league, Amari Cooper. He really is. Now, I don't want to say he's top 5, but, definitely has the potential to be. I did draft him in one of my leagues, in the 2QB league, actually, before I traded him. And the only reason why I traded him was because of Ben DiNucci. Because Ben DiNucci was not going to give, Amari Cooper the numbers that I expected him to give. But then when Andy Dalton came back, Amari Cooper started to play a little better, and he ended up being on the team that won the championship in my 2QB league, which is the league I do with my friends. So Amari Cooper got that ring, so good for him. But listen, when it comes to him and Dak Prescott, they're good. And, Amari Cooper can have games where he has over 200 yards. And especially in PPR leagues, you're definitely going to want to get Amari Cooper. Now, I don't want to say he's a number 1 wide receiver. He's like almost there when it comes to fantasy. But, unless you're playing in like a really deep league with like 16 teams or, like 12, Amari Cooper definitely could be a number 1 wide receiver. But, when it comes to, like the smaller leagues like 10 and 8, you could definitely get him as like your number 2 or a flex. I feel more confident with him as a number 2 or a flex in those leagues than I do with him, being a number 1 wide receiver in that league. Because there's definitely better receivers out there that you could get, But listen, Amari Cooper can put up crazy numbers. And Dak Prescott can put up crazy numbers in fantasy. I mean, we saw like all those marathon games against the Browns and the Falcons, those 40 to 39 games and all that. Amari Cooper's going to get a lot of targets. And, like I said, especially with PPR, you're definitely going to want to get him because, I think he's going to be better this season. And, if Dak Prescott's healthy, Dak Prescott's going to put up good fantasy numbers. So that's another combo that I have on this list. Now, the last 2 combinations, let's start off with the tight end that I have in this list. And that is the combo between Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. Okay, listen. You got to have both of these guys on your team. Okay? Travis Kelce could possibly be a first-round pick this season. I mean, that's how many targets he gets. That's Patrick Mahomes' security blanket. Travis Kelce you're going to want to get early, and Patrick Mahomes is again probably going to be one of the first QBs taken off the board. So you're going to want to get him too. So if you got those two, and believe me, I know from experience because I lost a game due to the fact that Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes were on that team, and that was when Patrick Mahomes threw the game-winning touchdown pass to Travis Kelce, who was wide open in the end zone for a touchdown. I ended up losing my fantasy matchup that week because of that, and there was 40 seconds left in the game. And, when you got those guys, because a QB and a receiver, that adds to, when they throw a touchdown pass to a receiver and, you have them both on your team, that's like 10 points. So that's a duo you want to have on your team as well. And then the last duo on this list, I think is the best one, is Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams. Aaron Rodgers, listen, the Packers don't have a lot of wide receivers outside of Davante Adams, but, they're incredible. They really are, those two. And, Aaron Rodgers is going to have another great season, I think. And Davante Adams is going to have another great season. The one concern is Davante Adams' injuries. But listen, I think they're the best combo. I really do. I mean, Davante Adams, I had one of his best seasons, if not his best season. And he led the league in touchdown receptions, I believe, this past season in 2020. And I don't think he's going to do that again, but you never know. And listen, if Aaron Rodgers is throwing him the football, they're going to be good. And Davante Adams is probably going to be the first receiver off the board. So you're going to want to get him, depending on where you're picking in the first round. And then, later on in the draft, if Aaron Rodgers is there, get it. Get that combination. It's a deadly combination. So yeah, with that, those are the 10 QB wide receiver combos that I think are the best when it comes to fantasy football. So with that, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the top 10 teams in the NFL that I think you're going to want to key in on and get your players from when it comes to fantasy. So stick around. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. For segment number 2 of the show, we're going to talk about the top 10 teams in the NFL that have players on their team that you're going to always want to key in and get some of these guys on your team to have a successful fantasy football season. So let's get right into the list. So I picked 10 teams. Along with that, I got a couple of honorable mentions. So the first team on this list, I'm going to say, is the Minnesota Vikings. And key players that you're definitely going to want to have on your team are Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, and Justin Jefferson. Now, Justin Jefferson, I think, is somebody that is going to be taken before Adam Thielen. And I think out of the 3 guys that I just said, it's going to probably go in the order of Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, and Adam Thielen. Now, the reason I have them in that specific order is because Dalvin Cook is one of the best running backs in the NFL. I mean, I think there's no question about it. And he's definitely a top 3 running back and definitely a top 3 pick. So if you're picking in the top 3, you're definitely going to want to get this guy. Justin Jefferson, emerged as a really good wide receiver for this team last year, replacing Stephon Diggs, who they traded to the Buffalo Bills. Adam Thielen is still a valuable wide receiver, but I think his stock is starting to go down a little bit. I think he's somebody you can get in the later rounds. But yeah, those are 3 guys that you're definitely going to want to key in on when you're drafting, and you might want to get at least one of those 3. And who knows, maybe you can get even 2 of them. Now, I don't have Kirk Cousins on this list. Now, it all depends on the kind of QB league that you play in. If you play in a 2 QB league or a 1 QB league. When it comes to 1 QB leagues, I mean, Kirk Cousins is going to fall way back. He could definitely be your second QB if you're doing a 2 QB league. And he could definitely be a guy that, you can have on your bench and, be the backup QB in case the QB that you have before him has like a bye week or something or is injured. He's somebody you can definitely put in. But, yeah, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and Dalvin Cook are probably the main guys that you're going to want to key in on when you're doing your drafts. So the next team on the list that I have here is, I'm going to say the Seahawks. Now, I just talked about them in the last segment. You're definitely going to want to get Russell Wilson. You're definitely going to want to get Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Chris Carson. Those are probably the top 4 players on the team that you're definitely going to want to key in on. They're valuable. Chris Carson gets injured a lot. Tyler Lockett is boom or bust sometimes, like we talked about. I think DK Metcalf has a chance to be even better than he's been, and Russell Wilson is definitely a top QB when it comes to fantasy. So I guess in the order that you would probably take these guys is probably Metcalf, Chris Carson, Russell Wilson, and then Tyler Lockett. I think that's the order you would probably go in when you're drafting these guys, where these guys will probably fall. Tyler Lockett probably later in the draft because, like I said, boom or bust potential. Like I said, he has those in the last segment. He has those games where he drops 50 points, and then there are games where he drops nothing. So, yeah, the Seahawks, those are key players that you want to key in on. They're a top offense when they're on fire, when they're on point. I mean, they do struggle sometimes, but I think you can rely on these players. Chris Carson has been injured the last couple seasons, but he's definitely a running back you could definitely that can definitely put up points when he is healthy. So yeah, that's the next team on this list. And then I guess another team would be the Rams. Matthew Stafford stepping in there. You got Robert Woods, you got Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, Cam Akers. That's a solid offense right there. Now, the order that you probably take the players in, I would say, it's tough, but I would probably say Robert Woods would maybe be the first pick that you would take out of that group, or maybe Matthew Stafford. Again, it all depends on the QB league that you do. So it would either probably be a tie between Stafford and Woods. Then you would probably go Kupp, then Akers, and then Higbee to round it out. Those are the guys that are key on the Rams that could definitely help your fantasy team. So then the next offense that I'd probably key in on that have players that you're definitely going to want to draft on your team, I would say probably the Browns. The Browns have Nick Chubb, they have Kareem Hunt. Baker Mayfield has a potential to have a breakout season. I think I said he was one of my sleepers in one of my earlier shows. I think he can have a really good season. He looked really good in the first season with Kevin Stefanski's new system. And Odell Beckham Jr. is coming back. Jarvis Landry is, kind of on and off sometimes. But I think really where you want to key in on is the running back position, and I guess OBJ and Baker. So Chubb is somebody that's going to get taken in the first round this year, so you're definitely going to want to get him early. Kareem Hunt, I think, could be a second, third round pick. Odell could be, I would say fifth or sixth. And Baker, again, he could be your backup he could definitely be your second QB. And, if you're doing a 1 QB league, like I said, he's going to fall later in the draft. So you could definitely get him. And who knows, maybe some people might just not draft him. I don't know. But yeah, the Browns. Then, other teams that we got here. The Tennessee Titans are one. Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown. Those are two guys that are really good. Derrick Henry is going to be a top 3 pick again in fantasy. I think there's no question about it. Rushing for 2,000 yards in 2020. Guy's a bulldozer. He's going to be, like I said, a top 3 pick. A.J. Brown has the potential to be a number 1 wide receiver in fantasy. And you could probably get him 3rd or 4th round. Maybe the end of the 2nd round. Ryan Tannehill is somebody that you could definitely get in the later rounds, definitely could be your second QB if you're doing a 2 QB league. And, if you're building a team, based off of positions that aren't quarterback, Ryan Tannehill could be that good QB that you get as your starter, because he has put up productive numbers since he was acquired by Tennessee back in 2019. So yeah, Tennessee Titans are another team that you're definitely going to want to get players on your team. And then, let's see, other teams on this list. Another team is the Chargers. And listen, I think they're going to have one of the most explosive offenses in the league in 2021 with Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler. Now, I think a guy, probably the first guy that's going to get taken out of that group is most likely Justin Herbert, just because of the season that he had. Like I mentioned on the last show, the reason why he was put in was because of the Chargers medical staff messing up an injection when it came to Tyrod Taylor, and that's what gave Justin Herbert the opportunity to come in and take over the starting role, and he never looked back. Had one bad game, and that was really it. So I think he's going to be the first player taken out of these group of players. Then probably Austin Eckler, who I think is another guy that's going to be looking to have a bounce back season after dealing with injuries in 2020. And Keenan Allen, I think, has the potential to be a number 1 wide receiver in fantasy. If Justin Herbert continues to develop. Mike Williams is somebody that, can ride your bench. You could definitely get him off the waiver wire. But, you know what? He's another guy that has the potential to do really good. It's just, he just is very inconsistent. But yeah, the Chargers are going to be a top offense, and I think that's a team that you're going to want to look at and say, you could definitely grab a couple players. You're going to want to grab those players from that team. So also on this list here, I'm going to have to mention the Dallas Cowboys as well. Listen, the Cowboys, I don't like them. I don't like the Cowboys. However, I know that they got a lot of guys on that team that can really help your fantasy team. I think Michael Gallup is one of those guys that you can kind of cross off and stay away from. I mentioned him in one of my earlier shows here that, he's somebody you're going to want to stay away from when it comes to drafting. But I think the 4 key guys that you're going to want to look at are Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb. Now, another possibility is maybe Blake Jarwin. Now, apparently the Cowboys are looking to draft Kyle Pitts, so the tight end, in the upcoming draft, one of the top prospects. So it's going to be interesting to see if they go ahead and add more firepower to this offense. But I really don't think as of right now I would say him, only because he hasn't been drafted to the Cowboys yet. They're looking at him, so anything can happen. But yeah, so I think like I said, the 4 key players that you want to look at are Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb. I think those are the 4 guys you want to key in on. Ezekiel Elliott's going to be a top 10 pick again. I think now with Dak Prescott coming back, that's only going to make him better, and I think an improved offensive line along with that. Zeke's going to have a bounce-back season. Dak's coming back, and he puts up good fantasy numbers. He could definitely be a QB1. Whether you're doing a 1 QB league or a 2 QB league, he's going to be really good. He's going to put up some numbers. Now, the one question mark you're going to have is injuries. You know, like, is he going to be able to come back from that injury and be productive? I think he will, but it remains to be seen. We'll find out when the season starts. And then Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. Amari Cooper you can definitely get in the mid-rounds. More towards, the 4th or 5th round, I would say. I mean, CeeDee Lamb has the potential to go ahead of him. He was very productive with Dak Prescott, and he was also productive with Andy Dalton as well. So, he's another guy that you might want to consider drafting if he's available to you. He could be he could be a number 2 wide receiver, and he could be a flex option, CeeDee Lamb. But I think Amari Cooper still is going to be the number 1 wide receiver in Dallas. So, yeah, those are the guys on the Dallas Cowboys that I think are going to be key. So, another team on the list here that I have here, I think I'm in the the top 3. So we got the Bucs, the Chiefs, and the Packers. And an honorable mention is going to be the Cardinals. So let's get to the Bucs first. So Tom Brady, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones. I'm trying to think of anybody else I'm missing. Antonio Brown's not back with the team yet, so I don't know what his deal is. But listen, the top pick from this team would have to be Mike Evans. Then I guess Godwin would probably be second. Then Brady. And then I guess, you would decide which one's better between Fournette and Ronald Jones. Now, they brought in Giovanni Bernard. I don't think he's really going to do anything. It remains to be seen what he's going to do. But, I think Mike Evans, he can be your number 1 wide receiver. Chris Godwin can even be a number 1 wide receiver for you. I mean, these guys are really talented. Brady throws to them a lot, especially, they're Brady's top 2 targets, and they're going to get a lot of targets. And if you're doing PPR, you're definitely going to want to get one of these 2 guys. Now, Mike Evans, I think, has more value because he's a red zone weapon. I mentioned that in the last segment when I was talking about the best duo combinations. But listen, when it comes to Brady is still productive, believe it or not. I mean, yeah, he did just win his 7th Super Bowl, so of course he's still productive. But, it's going to be interesting to see how he is this year. If he's protected, and look, this is year 2 of the system. If he's protected and everybody's healthy, this team is going to be really good. Again, I have no doubts that they aren't going to be good. But, I think Brady can definitely handle his own and be a QB1 again this year. And, I think that with a 2 QB league, for me, I'm trying to get other people. But he definitely is somebody that I have on my radar to be my second QB. Because I've had Brady on my team numerous times. And pretty much every time I have him on my team, my team wins the whole thing. So I'm going to try to recapture some of that magic if Brady's available. And then, Ronald Jones and Fournette's interesting. Fournette wasn't that great in the regular season, but, in the postseason he shined. Ronald Jones was pretty good in the regular season. He was the more valuable back when it came to fantasy. So let's see what they do with them this year. I don't know how you would go about it. I mean, for me, whoever's available at the time, and I feel like I could use one of them. It's going to be a tough decision. I think it's a flip of a coin who you would take. I mean, those guys are going to be getting in the later rounds anyways. So I don't really know. But yeah, those are probably the 5 guys on the Bucs that you're going to want to draft on your team if they're available. So then next on the list, I think I'm going to say the Packers. I'm going to say the Packers are the next team on the list. They're going to be number 2. And then I think you could probably guess who number 1 is going to be. I mean, I already said, what the remaining teams were, so kind of spoiled it. But the Packers, I think the guys you're going to want to key in on are Aaron Rodgers, of course, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, and I guess Robert Tonyan. Now, Tanyan's probably going to get picked last. Tanyan had a breakout season at the tight end spot. And listen, the tight end spot's very thin, when it comes to fantasy. And he was one of the top 10 tight ends in the league. So I think that's a guy you're going to want to get if your tight end spot's kind of lacking in the draft. Because, everybody's trying to draft running backs and wide receivers. And, there's very few tight ends that people are going to jump out and get in the earlier rounds. Like Travis Kelce, like George Kittle, like Darren Waller. And then, of course, QB is, I think, valued a little bit more over the tight end spot. So you got Tanyan's probably going to need to get taken last. Aaron Rodgers is probably going to be the third guy taken out of the four guys that I mentioned. I think it's going to go Devontae, Aaron Jones, Rodgers, Tanyan. And I think it goes for all formats that you're doing. PPR. Listen, Devontae Adams is the best wide receiver with that. I mean, he gets a lot of targets, and you know what? Gotta get him in there. So you gotta draft him. So yeah, Devontae Adams would be the first pick. Then Aaron Jones. Now, it's just I'm a little skeptical on him. The offensive line for the Packers isn't what it was last year. They did lose a few guys, and some guys are coming back from injury. So we'll see how Aaron Jones is. And then with Aaron Rodgers, I expect him to have a good productive season. I think he's going to be a QB1 again. With my 2 QB league, listen, if he's there, I'm going to late in the rounds, I'm going to take him. I mean, for me, I want to build my team before I get to the quarterback. I really do. Because I think with quarterbacks, there's so many of them out there that, they can give you 15, 20 points and you can be satisfied. But listen, Aaron Rodgers, I think this year will be a QB1. And then you got Robert Tanyan, of course. So yeah, the Packers would be the next team on this list. And then actually, team that I forgot to mention, which that's really bad, and they actually were a top offense last year, was the Buffalo Bills. And I literally just, mentioned Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs in my last segment. But yeah, I would say Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. You could maybe throw Emmanuel Sanders in there. I think he could be valuable. Cole Beasley you can maybe consider as well. But Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders, I think, are more of just bench players and flex options. I don't think they're really, that valuable. I mean, really, outside of Diggs and Josh Allen, I mean, there's really nobody other than the other two players that I mentioned that you really can consider being on your team. I think Diggs and Josh Allen are probably the two players that you definitely want to have on your team if they're there and you think you want to draft them. I mean, Diggs is going to be a number 1 wide receiver this year in fantasy, and he's probably going to get taken in the second round. And then Josh Allen's going to be one of the top QBs taken off the board. But those are really the only 2 players that are probably like fantasy essentials. I mean, the running back position is very questionable. Devin Singletary hasn't really worked out, and Zach Moss wasn't that amazing in his rookie season. So I guess the Bills can kind of be an honorable mention because they don't have as many players that you would draft as opposed to the other teams that I just mentioned. But again, like Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen are essentials, and you want to get them if, they're there. Cardinals will be another team that it's an honorable mention as well because I think really the only must-drafts or fantasy essentials are Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins. Other than that, everybody else is really a question mark. I mean, they don't really have a tight end. A.J. Green's not what he was 6 years ago. Larry Fitzgerald is not what he was 10 years ago. Christian Kirk, maybe you consider him as a bench player, but you could probably pick him up off the waiver wire. And then the running back spot, I don't really know what they're doing. I mean, they bring in James Conner. They have Chase Edmonds there. I don't really know. I mean, maybe Chase Edmonds can ride your bench, but that's really it. So yeah, so the Cardinals and the Bills, I guess, would be the honorable mention just because they don't really have as many fantasy essentials as some of these other teams. And then obviously number 1 would be the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, kind of throw in there. Guess he's going to be the number 1 running back. Yeah, I mean, what can you say? Patrick Mahomes is a top QB. He's going to be one of the first QBs taken off the board. Travis Kelce is going to be the first tight end taken off the board. Might be taken in the first round. Tyreek Hill's a top 5 wide receiver. These guys are really good. These are some of the best players in the NFL. And you're going to want to get these guys on your team. And like I said in the last segment with the combos, I mean, if you got a Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes combo, Like, that's a deadly combination. So, yeah, that's it with this segment. So those are the teams that I said, you want to look at those teams specifically, and you want to get a bunch of those players that are on those teams to have a successful fantasy season. Now, it's going to be tough, but you're obviously not going to get everybody, but, those are probably those offenses specifically you're going to want to zone in on and get players from those teams to have a successful fantasy season. So that's it with this segment. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the teams that you're going to want to avoid taking players from because of, questions at quarterback and a bunch of other stuff. So stick around. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for the third segment of the show. We're going to talk about the teams that you're really not going to want to draft anybody from their teams. There's really nobody enticing for the most part on these teams that are really going to help your team. Not to say that there aren't any players, but these teams don't really have particularly good offenses and have some question marks, whether it's at the quarterback position, play calling. You want to kind of stay away from them. So let's kind of get into it. So the first team on this list I have is the New Orleans Saints. Now, right off the bat, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, you want to have these guys on your team. They're going to have good seasons, I think. But outside of that, there's really nobody on this team that, really excites you. Now, you can take a risk and draft Jameis Winston, and maybe he'll return to that top fantasy player status that, he can be, because he is productive when it comes to fantasy. Last time he started, he threw 30 interceptions, and that's not really good, but he does put up some numbers, some good numbers, especially in garbage time, which is, again, something you want to have in fantasy. But, other than that, they don't have a tight end right now. There's Adam Trotman. I'm assuming maybe he's going to be the starting tight end. So maybe he's somebody you pick up later on if he produces. That's really the only tight end I can think of. I'm pretty sure they got rid of Josh Hill as well. So Josh Hill, Jared Cook not on the team anymore. Emmanuel Sanders is not there. It's really outside of Kamara and Michael Thomas. Who's really on this team that you're going to want to draft? I don't really know. Taysom Hill continues to be that gadget player, maybe, but I think for right now, you're a little skeptical with the Saints. Then the next team on this list, I have the Ravens. Now, Lamar Jackson, definitely a guy that people are going to draft. Mark Andrews is a good tight end. J.K. Dobbins is probably going to take over as the starting running back. But they don't have any receivers, though, that you could really rely upon. Marquise Brown really hasn't panned out the way the Ravens hoped for so far. They don't really have another wide receiver that's really dependable when it comes to fantasy. Willie Snead is still there, and I don't know what the deal is with Des Bryant, but these are guys that are not going to produce at a level that you would want them to when it comes to fantasy. But like I said, Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, Mark Andrews, those are guys you want to draft. But outside of that, there's really nobody else that really excites you. So that's another team that I have on this list. And then continuing on, we're going to go with the Chicago Bears. There's a lot of question marks with this team. I mean, Allen Robinson is a guy that people are going to draft. I mean, I'm going to stay away from him. I mean, because we don't know what the situation with the Bears is going to be. I mean, Andy Dalton is the starting quarterback. I mean, how well is he going to produce? The running back situation is a bit of a question mark. I mean, David Montgomery did have a breakout season. Is he going to be able to replicate that? So he might be somebody that you target. But, I mean, when it comes to the passing game, again, like outside of Allen Robinson, there's really nobody on that team that really is enticing and excites you. And I think if you're looking at guys on the Bears, there's really two of them, once again, that that jump out at you and are draft worthy. But outside of that, there's really nobody there. I mean, Anthony Miller, I think, is supposedly going to be traded possibly. So he's going to be gone. And other than that, there's, again, really nobody there that's really draft worthy outside of, I guess, David Montgomery and Allen Robinson. Now, Andy Dalton, you might have to pick him up in case, your quarterback's hurt or something and you need somebody to start that week. But other than that, probably stay away from guys that are on the Bears. So now, what I want to say before I get into my next team is right now, this is how the teams currently sit. Like, this is how I'm ranking them. This is before the draft. Once the draft comes around, things are going to change. So with the next pick, I'm going to have the Jacksonville Jaguars. So right now, they are picking number 1 in the draft. Most likely Trevor Lawrence is going to go there. And if Trevor Lawrence is the guy, then, things might change and the guys might, tick up a little bit. So Jacksonville, I think you want to avoid, getting guys outside of, I want to say, James Robinson, DJ Chark, Marvin Jones. I mean, other than that, is there really anybody else worthy of drafting? There's really no tight ends. They don't have another wide receiver outside of Chark and Marvin Jones that really excite you. James Robinson had a productive season, was the undrafted rookie, and he broke out. But outside of that, I mean, the quarterback spot, they had Mike Glennon and Gardner Minshew. I mean, those guys you're not going to want to draft. Well, Mike Glennon's now on the Giants. But listen, Trevor Lawrence is there. It's a different story. Right now, there's very few guys on the team that you'll draft. You want to avoid guys from Jacksonville. So next on this list, we have the Detroit Lions. Now, there's a few guys. There's Swift, DeAndre Swift. And, if you're desperate at the quarterback spot, you gotta go. I guess you go with Jared Goff, but there's really, and I guess Hawkinson as well, the tight end. But I don't think Detroit is going to be anything exciting this season. I think Jared Goff is unfortunately going to struggle. I'm pulling for him. I hope he does well, but I don't think the offense is going to be something, that's going to impress anybody. And this is as of right now. I mean, we're just making predictions here. I mean, anything can happen, but I just don't see the Lions being a potent offense. Jared Goff is going to struggle. Now that he's not in the system with Sean McVay, it's something to be concerned about. And, I think DeAndre Swift is going to be pretty good. Hawkinson's a good tight end, but right now they don't have any receivers. Galladay's gone, Marvin Jones is gone. I mean, those are guys that produced for this team, and they're no longer there. So the offense is going to struggle. They're not really going to be anything special this season. It's a rebuilding team. You're going to want to avoid players that are on the Lions. So the next team on this list, we got the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, there are players on this team that you definitely can consider drafting. One of them is somebody I really haven't talked about, is Joe Mixon. I mean, he was injured this past season in 2020, and he's looking to bounce back and be productive again. So he's going to be good, probably. You have T. Higgins, who was developing last season. He had a nice chemistry with Joe Burrow, but, who knows what's going to happen with Joe Burrow? Is he going to come back? Is he going to play? I mean, he tore his ACL and MCL, I believe, so it's going to take a long time for him to come back. And if he doesn't come back, I mean, who's starting for the Bengals? You know, they had Brandon Allen and Ryan Finley starting. I mean, if that's who is going to be throwing the football around, I mean, I don't want to draft anybody from the Bengals, and I wouldn't want to draft T. Higgins then. I mean, if Burrow is starting, then that's a different story. But, you know, outside of Mixon, I mean, there's really nobody on this team that you're really going to want to look at and be like, all right, I want guys on this team. You know, they're not going to be that good of an offense this season. They're not, especially with Burrow being out. So the Bengals are another team that, when it comes to players outside of maybe Joe Mixon, you're going to want to avoid drafting players from. So the next team on this list, I'm going to say, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the reason for that is I have them a little high on this list. I think, you know, the one thing about them right now is they don't have a running back. They have no running game as of right now. James Conner is gone. Le'Veon Bell has been gone. You know, they didn't do anything in free agency to address the running back spot as of right now. At least, you know, what I could think of off the top of my head. I don't know what the story is with the offense. I mean, Claypool, is somebody people are going to want to draft. I mean, Juju Smith-Schuster really has not been what everybody thought he was going to be. You know, once Antonio Brown left, you know, everybody was thinking, you know, is Juju going to be that number one wide receiver? Is he going to take the next step? He really hasn't done that. I mean, I think right now he's undraftable. Really do. I mean, he's so inconsistent. Really has barely any breakout games. And he doesn't really provide any worth for your team. He doesn't do anything that, you know, makes you want to believe he's going to produce. And then, you know, you got to look at the quarterback spot. Ben Roethlisberger. You know, he's not what he was back in his heyday. He struggled in the playoff game against the Browns with all those turnovers. I mean, is he going to be undraftable? I mean, I think if you're really desperate, you got to pick him up. You can pick him up. I'm going to be interested to see, you know, especially with my drafts, are people going to actually draft him? You know, I mean, there's a lot of question marks with them, with the Steelers. Now they can address the running back spot in the draft, and you know that's going to change. Like I said, like this is all stuff before the draft. You know, once the draft comes around, you know, there's going to be more things to talk about. But you know, right now the Steelers don't have a running back. They got question marks at the quarterback spot. A lot of these guys are inconsistent too. You know, I mean, think about it. I just spent the last segment, you know, talking about the best offenses that have the best players on the team. Those teams that you're going to want to draft. You know, these are the teams that you want to stay away from. You know, but I just think there's a lot of question marks with the Steelers, and you know, it's going to be tough for them. I'm interested to see how they're going to do this season. But I think when you're looking at players on the Steelers, I think you're going to want to stay away from them just because there's a lot of uncertainty with how Ben Roethlisberger is going to be. Is he going to rebound from the playoff game? I mean, it's going to be tough because he's older now. They don't have a running back. So, yeah, the Steelers are another team on this list. You may want to avoid taking players from their team. Next team on this list, we're going to go with the Philadelphia Eagles. Talk about question marks. There is a lot of question marks with the Eagles. I mean, first of all, they drafted Jalen Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson. That was a big mistake. Jalen Reagor was injured a lot. Really did not do anything this past season for the Eagles. Alshon Jeffrey is not there anymore. Deshaun Jackson is not there anymore. Zach Ertz is... I mean, I don't know what the deal is with him. They still haven't traded him or anything. They might have released him. I don't know, but he's not. He was going to probably be a non-factor on this team. So Dallas Goedert's going to be the starting tight end, most likely. So odds are Zach Ertz is gone. I mean, I think we knew that. I knew that. I think a lot of people knew that, especially because of him being very emotional after the last game he played in Philadelphia. I mean, so they don't right now. The Phillies, the Eagles don't have any weapons. There's a lot of question marks at wide receiver. Miles Sanders and Boston Scott are good in the backfield. Miles Sanders is somebody you can definitely consider. Jalen Hurts is definitely something you can consider too. Somebody you want to consider. He was very productive in his starts in terms of fantasy. He could have played better in the games that he played in, but when it came to fantasy, he was pretty good. He was pretty productive. He's somebody you can consider, but I think he's somebody that might, be undrafted and then somebody that's going to be a late season pickup. But he did show some promise when it came to fantasy because I did have to go to him when I had Carson Wentz on my team, and I knew, like I talked about, I think it was in the last show, Carson Wentz, was struggling, and I knew once we got to the Green Bay game, it was only inevitable he was going to get benched. So I made sure to pick up Jalen Hurts like a couple weeks before Carson Wentz finally got benched, and it was smart. And, Jalen Hurts was productive, but the Eagles, they don't have anybody at receiver. I mean, I'm not going to draft Greg Ward or Jalen Reagor. I mean, that's not happening. I mean, really the only people that you could think of that you would want to draft is Goddard, Miles Sanders, and Jalen Hurts. That's really it. But outside of that, you're going to want to avoid taking players from that team. They don't really have anybody that really jumps out at you. Another team that really doesn't have anything outside of the players that I mentioned that are somewhat draftable. So next on this list, we got the New York Jets. Now, Corey Davis, they signed. He's somebody that I think will be drafted by a lot of people. But outside of that, I mean, and I guess Jamison Crowder as well. But really those two players, I think that's it. I mean, right now they don't have a quarterback. I don't think Zach Wilson is most likely going to get picked by the Jets, but I don't think he's going to be somebody you're going to want to go and get right away unless you're doing a dynasty league. But I'm talking specifically for, standard leagues and PPR. I don't think Zach Wilson is somebody that's going to get drafted. I mean, he's probably going to be a late season addition to your team. Or, if he shows some flashes early on, if this is somebody, if we don't even know if the Jets are drafting him. I'm just speculating, but it's most likely going to be him that the Jets are going to use their second overall pick with, because Sam Darnold is no longer there. So I think it's only inevitable that it's going to be Zach Wilson. It's not going to be Trevor Lawrence because he's most likely going to go to Jacksonville. But like I said, I'm ranking them before the draft. So right now the Jets don't have a quarterback. So whatever quarterback comes in, if they produce, if some of the guys that are already there produce, then that's different. But, I mean, Braxton Berrios, I don't think Denzel Mims is going to be, a superstar yet. He showed some flashes in a couple of games that he played last season, but he's not really a viable fantasy option. Running back spot, I mean, if you're in really deep leagues and LaMichael Pirine is there, then go after him. But there's really nobody on the Jets that, jumps out at you that, you want to get. I mean, other than, like I said, Corey Davis and Jamison Crowder, which I think Jamison Crowder is the better option because, he's, I guess, the established receiver on this team. Corey Davis, this was kind of his breakout season. So I guess, he's going to have to replicate that to kind of prove that, he is that guy. So, yeah, the Jets, number 2 on this list. So, number 1 on this list, I mean, I can't really say, there's really any players that you're going to want to draft on this team. It's because we don't know what the quarterback situation is going to be. And that's the Houston Texans. So, unless you've been living under a rock, the Houston Texans are a disaster of a franchise. And, all the legal stuff going on with Deshaun Watson, it doesn't look good right now for Deshaun Watson. So I'm going to assume that he is not going to be playing for the Houston Texans. Right now, the other QBs on this team are Ryan Finley and Tyrod Taylor, who I don't think anybody should be drafting. Okay. Now, Ryan Finley played, a couple games last season for the Bengals. Tyrod Taylor played that full game one full game against the Bengals, actually, which was back in week 1 for the Chargers, and then that was it for him. But, if you got Tyrod Taylor and Finley throwing to Brandon Cooks, who is really the only wide receiver that you can maybe even consider drafting. I think David Johnson, he's done. They got a loaded backfield now with Mark Ingram and Phillip Lindsay. It's just a disaster right now over there in Houston. I think it's safe to say, just don't draft anybody from their team. I can make the case for some of these teams. The Texans, I really cannot make a case to draft anybody from this team. They are just a dumpster fire of a franchise. They have nothing. They're falling. They already fell off the cliff. They're just in a downward spiral. It's really bad. Now, if Deshaun Watson was playing, maybe I say, okay, Brandon Cooks is definitely a respectable option that you could definitely go out and get. They could still, some of these guys can still produce. I guess you could maybe say Phillip Lindsay and Brandon Cooks, but Mark Ingram, I don't know. It's just, they're really bad. They're just really bad. So you know what? For your sake, just avoid getting players from the Houston Texans. You're better off. So those are the list for the teams that, when it comes to drafting players, maybe you want to kind of stay away from them. Go for the teams that I mentioned in the last segment. So with that, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we're going to do a new segment on the show called Draft or Pass, which is pretty simple and not really that original of a name. But I'm going to take 10 QBs. I have 10 QBs here. So some of the guys that I talked about in this segment you might you might hear about in the next segment. I'm going to take 10 QBs and I'm going to say draft or pass. So with that, we're going to take another quick break. So stick around. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Alright, and we are back here on the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for our last segment of the show. We're going to be doing something a little different, something that I'm going to do for the next couple of shows. It's going to be just a segment called Draft or Pass. I'm going to take players. Today's show, we're going to do quarterbacks. We're going to take 10 quarterbacks, and I'm just going to come up with a scenario in which, that is appropriate for when these guys would be drafted around, if they are indeed drafted, and then I'm going to determine whether or not I want to draft them or pass them. So, like I said, we're going to do quarterbacks for today's show, we're going to do running backs next, and then we're going to do receivers for the show after that, and then tight ends after that. And, maybe if I want to do it, we can do defenses and we can do kickers. So, yeah, but that's, down the road. So, let's start off with QBs for this week. So, let's start with number 10. At number 10, I have Derek Carr. So, typically with Derek Carr, is somebody that's probably going to get taken in the later rounds when it comes to fantasy drafts. And, when it comes to, 1 QB leagues, I think he's somebody you would draft to be a backup if you're doing 1 QB leagues. If you're doing 2, he's somebody you definitely could draft for your number 2 QB. Now, would I draft or pass on Derek Carr? I'm going to say, overall, I think I would draft him. If he's late in the later rounds, if it's at the appropriate time, I think Derek Carr had a productive season last year, for the Raiders, and I think that he's somebody that's been very underrated throughout his career, and he's definitely a quarterback that, has weapons around him. He's got Darren Waller, who the Raiders paid, he's got nice pieces at running back with Josh Jacobs. The offensive line's might be taking a little bit of a step back, so that's something that's going to be cause for concern, and I guess, the injury history as well. But I think Derek Carr is somebody that you want to have on your team if he's available to you, and, you're kind of lacking at the quarterback position. Now, do I think he's going to be, like an Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes type quarterback and, be outstanding week in and week out? Absolutely not. But I think he has a track record that he's somebody that you want to have on your team, in a backup role, or if, like myself, if you're doing a 2 QB league, you want to have him on your team. So I would say draft Derek Carr. The next QB on this list is Ben Roethlisberger. I'm going to say pass on Ben Roethlisberger. I think that he's somebody that, again, like Derek Carr, he has a proven track record. Now, unlike Derek Carr, Ben Roethlisberger is a future Hall of Famer. I think there's no question about it. I mean, he's had a great career. He's a 2-time Super Bowl champ, and that should be respected. But you gotta be concerned about some of the things going on with the Steelers. They don't have a running back right now, as I mentioned in the last segment. Now that can all change in the draft, obviously, but Ben Roethlisberger, he's older now. He's in his late 30s. He's not the same player that he once was, and he's a guy that can be a turnover machine, and that's something you don't want to have on your team. And there's better options out there, of course. Now, can he be a backup on your team? And could he be somebody that you could pick up off the waiver wire? Of course. But when it comes to drafting, I mean, I think you want to pass on him. I think there's so many question marks right now in Pittsburgh, and it's really tough right now at this point to say that Ben Roethlisberger is a viable fantasy option. All right, so the next QB on this list, I have Carson Wentz, who was acquired by the Indianapolis Colts in the offseason from the Philadelphia Eagles. I think no matter what QB format you're doing, whether it's 1 or 2 QB leagues, I think that Carson Wentz is a draft. I think no matter what. I really think he's poised to have a bounce-back season. He had a really bad season in 2020 with the Eagles, and he got benched for Jalen Hurts. And with a change of scenery, and now coming back and being reunited with Frank Reich, I really think Carson Wentz is going to be a solid QB overall and in fantasy. I really do. And he's got one of the best offensive lines in the league now supporting him. The Colts definitely need to address some of the skill positions. They did bring back T.Y. Hilton. They still got Michael Pittman there. Jonathan Taylor's coming out of the backfield, and he's going to be the lead back. So I'm anticipating that, he's going to have a great season too for the Colts. With Frank Reich back in 2017, in 13 games, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. If he doesn't tear his ACL, he wins MVP. And that was the most points he scored in fantasy in his career. And I think that, he's going to be the quarterback that we were accustomed to seeing, more so back in 2017 than as opposed to what we saw in 2020. I think he's a no-brainer. Now, obviously, he's not, Patrick Mahomes. He's not Aaron Rodgers. But you know what? He's a guy that could be a solid QB. Can definitely be a QB1. He's definitely right there. And you know what? Like, I'm doing 2 QB leagues, or 1-2 QB league. He's definitely a solid number 2. Absolutely. And I think now being reunited with Frank Reich, with the weapons at his disposal, with the offensive line, Colts, what they needed last year was a quarterback. And Phillip Rivers did have a productive season for them, but he wasn't really that athletic. Carson Wentz is more athletic than Phillip Rivers is. And I just think, the Colts are a QB away from, taking the next step and being a contender in the AFC. And Carson Wentz, is what they needed. And the Colts are going to be really good going into next season. But when it comes to fantasy, Carson Wentz is definitely a guy that you want to have on your radar. And he's somebody that I definitely could see myself drafting when people start doing their fantasy drafts in the next couple of months, which is really crazy. I mean, we're getting closer to that time. So, yeah, Carson Wentz, I would draft him. Next QB on this list, we got Jalen Hurts, who was the replacement for Carson Wentz when they were both together as teammates on the Eagles in 2020. So, Jalen Hurts is a very interesting pick. Now, I spent the last segment talking about how you should kind of avoid taking players from the Eagles because, there's really not a lot of guys out there on the Eagles. They don't really have a lot of weapons. Outside of, like I mentioned, Miles Sanders, Dallas Goedert, they don't really have receivers right now. Jalen Hurts doesn't have a lot of weapons, which is going to be a problem. Now, I thought in terms of fantasy numbers, he produced. You had the Arizona Cardinals game. He put up a lot of points. Had 30 plus points in that game. I think that he is draftable, and I think when it comes to 2 QB leagues, I think he's somebody that you can definitely have on your radar, and he's somebody you can get in the later rounds. Now, what do I think? Do I think draft or pass Jalen Hurts? I'm going to say in terms of 1 QB leagues, I'm going to say pass. When it comes to 2 QB leagues, I'm going to say draft. Because, like the QBs I've said before, on this list, there's QBs out there you can get that are better than Jalen Hurts. And, especially when it comes to 1 QB leagues, I mean, he could definitely be a QB that is on your bench that you store away in case, your guy that you typically use, that your starter gets hurt or something, or bye week. But I think, unless you're doing a 2 QB league, I think maybe you stay away from Jalen Hurts. Just because there is a lot of question marks when it comes to the Eagles' skill position players. So yeah, Jalen Hurts, if it's a 1 QB league, I would pass. If it's a 2 QB league, I would draft him. The next QB on this list is very interesting, and that is Ryan Fitzpatrick. Now, it looks like he's going to be the starter for the Washington football team. And this is a guy that he can have a game where he throws for over 400 yards, has 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, and then the week after he throws for under 200 yards and throws 3 interceptions and no touchdowns. I'm going to say pass on Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I'm saying that when it comes to all leagues. I think he is somebody you could pick up on the waiver wire, and you could definitely plug him in and play him for just 1 week. He could be that rental guy. But outside of that, I'm staying away from him. He is very inconsistent. Now, he's very fun to watch, of course, but he's just so inconsistent. He could be a turnover machine, and that's something you don't want to have on your team. Now, 2 QB leagues, he can have a little bit more value. When it comes to 1 QB leagues, I mean, I would stay away from him because there's other QBs out there that are better than him and don't turn the ball over as much as this guy does. And also because I think Washington, they got some nice pieces on offense. They do. Logan Thomas, they acquired Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin is there. They got J.D. McKissick and Antonio Gibson coming out of the backfield. So they do have weapons. But, I mean, I'm interested. We got to see how it works with Ryan Fitzpatrick now installed into the starting rotation. For me, I would stay away from him. Okay, the next QB on this list, we have Andy Dalton, who was acquired by the Chicago Bears signed with the Chicago Bears. So he spent the past season with Dallas, had a rough start, did kind of settle in and played better down the stretch, but I think it's a pass. I mean, I would not want him on my team. I just wouldn't. The Bears, outside of Allen Robinson and David Montgomery, there's really nobody that really jumps out at you that you want to draft on your team. I just think the Bears are just kind of in a downward spiral as well. I think the offense is really not going to be anything special this upcoming season. I don't think Andy Dalton is, he's not what he was 5 years ago. It's not going to be a good season for him, and it's not going to be a good season for the Bears. But look, they do have a few pieces. If you want to be positive, they have a few pieces, but nothing that really just excites you as a Bears fan. And I just think that, he's a guy that is another Ryan Fitzpatrick. He could be a turnover machine too. I mean, he can have good games, definitely. But, he could definitely be a turnover machine. And that's something you don't want to have on your team. It's not. But again, he could be another guy you could pick up, in case your starter gets hurt. You need somebody to start for 1 week. And depending on what the matchup is, you could rent them for 1 week and then drop them the next. But, when it comes to drafting, you're just going to want to pass and try to find a better option when it comes to backup and, of course, when you're looking for a starting QB. All right, we got 4 QBs left on the list. And at number 4, we got Jameis Winston. Now, Jameis Winston was the full-time starter for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back in 2019, threw 33 touchdowns, had 30 interceptions. That was a crazy season. And, look, in terms of fantasy, did great, but when it came to the turnovers, it was something that really wasn't something that you want. And, when it comes to drafting or passing on Jameis Winston, I think I'm going to pass on Jameis Winston. Because there's a lot of unknowns with Jameis Winston. How is he going to be now that he's the full-time starter? He's taking over the role for Drew Brees because Drew Brees is gone now. He's no longer there. How is he going to be in this role? Now, he's going to have some guys to throw to, Michael Thomas, and I would assume he's going to check it down to Kamara a lot as well. I think he's going to I think he's going to cut down on the turnovers, but, that remains to be seen. I think it's just, there's too much of a risk factor with him. But, if you want to draft him, go right ahead. For me, I'm passing on him. There's too much of a risk. There's better options out there. You could probably pick him up on the waiver wire if nobody picks him up, especially in 1 QB leagues. 2 QB leagues is a different story. I think maybe more people will be open to getting him, but not necessarily to be the number 2 QB, maybe to be the backup. And plus the Saints, they play in a division with the Buccaneers. So, how is Jameis Winston going to do against his former team? It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. I think that, though, you're better off just letting somebody else deal with his turnover problems, if that's a thing. And, there's other options out there that you can get. Too much of a risk factor. Jameis Winston, number 4 on this list. At number 3, we got Matt Ryan, draft or pass. I'm going to say draft Matt Ryan, because I think Matt Ryan still puts up consistent fantasy numbers. I think that he could still be, he's not the QB1 that he once was, but he could definitely provide stability for you. 2 QB leagues, 100%, I would draft him if he's there. Because listen, he's got Calvin Ridley, he's got Julio Jones, he's got guys he can throw the ball to. And I think that plays well for you if you draft him. And sometimes, Atlanta's, putting up garbage points at the end of games, and that benefits well for you if you have Matt Ryan on your team. And, listen, he's getting up there in age, so who knows? Who knows what the Falcons are going to do at the draft? Are they going to take a QB? Could it be possible that Matt Ryan could be replaced? I don't know. But I think as long as he's still the starter for Atlanta, he still can be considered a QB that you could take. He's a safe pick, and I think with his track record, he's proven that, he could be a competent starter in your lineup. And as long as Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley are healthy, I think he's a guy that you would draft to your team, depending on what your situation is. So at number 2, we have the new Carolina Panthers quarterback, and that is Sam Darnold. Now, it's most likely that Sam Darnold is going to start for the Panthers, but I would probably pass on Darnold because he's not really a good fantasy quarterback. He really hasn't had any amazing games so far in his career. It's been very few. And there are games that he's looked really bad in. There are games that he has shown promise in, but it's just the bad outweighs the good right now in terms of his track record. I think now he's going into a much better situation with the Panthers. This is the best supporting cast that he's had since he's been in the NFL. He's definitely going to check it down a lot to Christian McCaffrey, and he's going to use him, and Christian McCaffrey's looking to have a bounce-back season. And then you're reunited with Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore is there. Yeah, but I just think that there's a lot of question marks with Sam Darnold. And, he's probably somebody that, again, will be on the waiver wire as well after your fantasy drafts conclude, unless, again, you're in a very super deep league. You're in a 16-team league. But I just think that there's a lot of question marks with Darnold. He's entering a new system. What is he going to look like? I think we'll know a lot once we get 3 or 4 games into the season. But right now there's too many question marks surrounding Darnold, and there's better backup options out there that you could definitely get. He's definitely somebody you don't want to have on your team as of right now. Now that could change. He could shock the world and look like the number 2 overall pick that he was supposed to be. But again, there's too many question marks. The turnovers are a problem, and there's other options out there. So I would pass on Sam Darnold. And now that brings me to the final QB on this list, and that is the quarterback for the New York Giants, Daniel Jones. Now, I am a Giant fan. I like Daniel Jones. But am I going to draft him? If he's there, do I want him to be my second QB? Do I want him to be my backup QB? And the answer is I'm going to pass on Daniel Jones as well. Now, the reason for that is kind of the same thing with Sam Darnold, question marks. Daniel Jones only threw 11 touchdown passes last year. Was effective on the ground, and was injured. So all that has a lot to do with why I'm saying I would pass on Daniel Jones. I want to say draft, but it's just all the reasons I just listed. I can't really trust him right now. Now, in terms of his supporting cast as well, he's got a great supporting cast. This is the best supporting cast he's had since he's entered the league. So that's definitely going to elevate him. Saquon Barkley's coming back. All signs do point to Daniel Jones having a much better season than he did in his second season in the NFL. But I think right now, to be safe, I think you just pass on Daniel Jones and you let him sit on the waiver wire, see how he does the first couple weeks, and if he impresses you, get him on your team. When it comes to the 2 QB league, listen, my backup QB is not doing good, and Daniel Jones is sitting there, might have to take him. Just to pick him up, have an insurance policy in case my other QBs get hurt. So yeah, those are the 10 QBs for the draft or pass segment. So next time we will do the top 10 running back. Well, not the top 10 running backs, but the 10 running backs that I'll list, and I'll do draft or pass for that. That'll be the final segment for that show. So we'll just do draft or pass for the next couple weeks. Those will be the final segments for each show. We'll go, like I said, we'll go through running backs, receivers, tight ends, and like I said, we could do maybe defenses and kickers. So yeah, that's the list there. So with that, that is all the time we have for today's show. Thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe to our social media platforms and write a nice review. We greatly appreciate it. And yeah, that's all we got. So I'm Kenneth Gruenfelder signing off for the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Have a good day, and we will see you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.